Good afternoon. I'm sorry, I think you're still chewing. Good afternoon. The conch is amazing. I had conch fritters yesterday, and the conch chowder, and I guarantee you I'm not going to be conked out by the time I head home. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey. I am host of A More Perfect Union and Chief White House Correspondent for KBLA Talk 1580, and a professor over at Pepperdine. And so what does that mean? It means I like to be interactive. And so as you eat, don't be surprised if I ask you to tap in to this conversation in real time. Before I go any further, I want to extend warm greetings to Dr. David Thomas of Morehouse College. We had a chance to speak moments ago, but there is a rich legacy that you have played an outsized role in, and as your tenure winds down at Morehouse, I want you to know that your legacy is incredible. Terrence Woodbury, proud Morehouse alum. Alan Orr, proud Morehouse alum. Ori Ward. The list goes on and on of so many of my friends who've talked about how your leadership has made a difference in their academic experience. And so I bring their greetings. Let's give Dr. David Thomas a hand. Heard so many stories about Henry Goodgame over at Morehouse. And the support that you have lent is long-lasting, and so hat tip to you. To former MP and the president of the Morehouse College Alumni Association, Mark Humes. Where's Mark? I want to say a big thank you. Let's give Mark a big hand. I also want to acknowledge the ancestors. I want to welcome the ancestors into this space. I would be remiss if I didn't speak the name of Adam Clayton Powell Jr., former U.S. representative in the House, a civil and human rights advocate, someone who pressed a number of U.S. presidents to support emerging nations in Africa as they gain their independence after colonialism. I want to speak the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's no stranger to Morehouse. It's a proud Morehouse man there. He's also no stranger to the Bahamas. He often visited Adam Clayton Powell Jr., his mentor, right here in the Bahamas, in nearby Bimini. Did I get that right? Bimini? Dr. King considered Powell one of the most influential black men in America, a kingmaker who would help Dr. King and his work garner international attention. And so I speak the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I speak your names. There are a lot of places that we could all be, but what a blessing that we get to be together. There's a lot of headlines out there about black men. Who are we? What are we going to do in this upcoming election? What do we care about? Where are we overrepresented and underrepresented? And so it's a delight to be in a room of so many titans and emerging leaders who get to answer that question through our deeds. We get to answer that question through service. I want to talk today about my own story. You may have heard that I recently published a book called Kamala, the Motherland, and Me. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but I think it's important for me to share my origin story. It's important to understand where I'm coming from. We all exist in a context. And I've heard so much talk about the impact that our fathers and father figures have had on us. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about my own dad, who is no longer with us in the flesh, but with us in the spirit, Joseph Quatey. That was my dad. And just to give you a sense of who my dad was, I had the kind of dad that would call me in from playing outside and say, son, sit here on the couch. You got to watch this on C-SPAN. I had the kind of dad that would take me to public lectures at UC Berkeley in the Bay Area where I grew up. I had the kind of dad that fed my curiosity, that raised me to be a citizen of the world, that raised me to understand that when I left our house, that I was an ambassador of our family. And by family, not just the Quarteys who lived under one roof at 2513 Hamilton Avenue, but I was acutely aware of the family members, many of which I would never meet, an ocean away, in my father's homeland of Ghana. And so it is with that responsibility, it's with that legacy that I do my work today. That is the context that I come from. You know, my dad dreamed of me being a lawyer. I remember the day I graduated from USC, he said, so what law schools are we applying to? Dad, there isn't going to be a law school. Instead, I decided to chart a different path. Now, from the time I was a kid, I thought maybe I would be a journalist. I wanted to travel to New York and study journalism. And in that pursuit, in college, I interned at CNN and Good Morning America, did all the things. And then after college, when it came time to get a job, I didn't want to move to a small market and do that game. You know, work your way up from Kalamazoo back up to New York or LA. And so instead, I went to go work for an elected official. Went to work for a school board member in Los Angeles. I cut my teeth in local politics. You know, they say all politics is local. Well, I wanted to learn, what do they mean by that? What does that look like? And I learned quite a deal. I learned a great deal doing that. I would look up almost 15 years later and discover that I had built a career in public affairs and advocacy, political campaigns. And, had a nice cushy job, some might say, working for one of the largest advocacy organizations in the United States, AARP. And during the COVID pandemic, I'm sure a lot of us were asking ourselves, what might we do differently if we had the opportunity to get out of this pandemic? What might we do differently? I felt like what I was doing was nice, but it wasn't it. I wasn't doing what I was called to do. And it became increasingly uncomfortable. Zoom call after Zoom call. Y'all remember that? That marathon Zoom life that we were living? Became really uncomfortable. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew that something else was summoning me. The misinformation and disinformation that affected our people disproportionately. Imagine that. people just getting bad information and making decisions that could have perilous impact on themselves and on their families. I had a front row seat. Saw it happening right before my eyes. And I felt that there was something more that I could do as somebody who has spent their life and career in community, who had engendered trust, that had something to say. And so, in an act of radical imagination, I left my big cushy job and I returned to my first love of journalism. Now, I had a number of friends who said, "You crazy." Raise your hand if you've ever had any of your friends tell you, "You crazy for making this decision or that decision." Okay, I'm not alone. It was what some people may call crazy is what other people might call betting on yourself. What some people call crazy, you just might call that an act of faith. That's what I decided to do. And boy, I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of that, but I knew that it was better than where I was at that moment. Cut to a conversation I had at the NAACP Image Awards with a friend who said to me, "You know, Vice President Harris is getting ready to go to Africa." "Oh, really? Where's she going?" "I think she's going to Ghana, maybe a few other places, but she's definitely going." At the time, I was co-anchor of The Black Report, which was an experiment by Fox Television and Fox Soul. And my antennas went up. Monday morning, firing off emails to my contacts at the White House to investigate the truth of this. And indeed, it was true. And indeed, I made a pitch as someone who is proudly Ghanaian-American, somebody who has Bay Area roots. I could understand the psychology by which the VP might be putting this trip together. And people had to know. They accepted my pitch. Long story short, I boarded Air Force Two and traveled along with Vice President Harris to Ghana, to Tanzania, and Zambia. I had a front row seat to history. And what an incredible trip. What a dream assignment. As somebody who is multi-heritage. You see, my mother's Black American. She grew up just over the water in Florida, Manatee County, Jim Crow, Florida, to be exact. My father grew up in Accra. How many people here, by show of hands, are familiar with the capital city of Ghana, Accra? Yeah, that's where my dad grew up. In fact, he was born into Ghana under colonial rule. He was 7 years old when Ghana declared its independence from the British. My father had a Pan-African mindset. My mother had a very deep consciousness around civil and human rights. As chance would have it, my parents would meet at an HBCU in Tyler, Texas. Texas College in Tyler, Texas. And later, my dad would get a great job in the Bay Area that would move the family to California, where I was born many years later. So already you're starting to see the parallels between my story, being multi-heritage, being the son of an immigrant, growing up in the Bay Area, a part of the country, a part of the world, where you have this convergence of the anti-war movement, the women's liberation movement, the Black Panther movement, the LGBTQ rights movement, all right there in the Bay Area. My dad told me this story And I never forgot it. In fact, it's in the book, Kamala, the Motherland of Me. He told me a story of being in his dorm room. And a bunch of his friends run up to his door and they're banging on his door and they're saying, Joe, your people are on TV. Your people are on TV. My dad said, my people are on TV? What do you mean? So they all rushed down to the student lounge. And right there on a little black and white television in 1970, Tarzan and Jane. Even at an HBCU in the South in 1970, that was the concept that some of our own people had of the continent. So cut to spring 2023, when another proud HBCU alum gasses up Air Force Two to return to the continent to write a different story. You feel the weight of that? I certainly felt the weight of that responsibility to tell that story. In fact, if I didn't know about my dad's story, I probably wouldn't have the same appreciation for the vice president's story. I wouldn't have the same appreciation for the attention to detail, for the radical imagination that went into designing her trip to Africa, which wasn't about just taking a tour around the continent. It's important business. The VP has said this trip could have focused on public health, could have focused on humanitarian aid. She decided to focus on investing in Africa, investing in entrepreneurship, restructuring the debt of our allies in Africa, finding new ways to support the national security of our partners in Africa, spotlighting places like Lusaka, Zambia, where they're using AI-powered technology to fight against climate change. Can you imagine that? They're using AI to fight against climate change in Lusaka. Let me tell you, my colleagues in the press corps couldn't believe what they were seeing. To visit Tanzania, where they had a historic first. Their first black woman vice president became the first black woman president of Tanzania when their president passed away. And I'm looking at the parallels here, and I'm like, wait a minute. Is anybody else seeing this? My story is possible through the practice of radical imagination. The story that I covered, the VP story, is only possible through radical imagination. And so I want to, I forgot I had a PowerPoint presentation. This was the salute to you. Yeah. What's your intention? I want you to take a moment. You got a little something in your stomach now, a little more energy. I want you to jot it down on that notepad in front of you. What is your intention? It doesn't have to be time bound. It could be for today. It could be tomorrow. By the end of the year, beyond. Maybe after our friend and brother finishes his retirement home. And now I want to ask you a question that sometimes it feels like there's a lot of heat around this question. Sometimes it feels like there's a lot of heat. It feels like there's a lot of judgment around this. Who do you think you are? That's the second question. Who do you think you are? I certainly think of myself as a curious black kid of Ghanaian-American heritage from the Bay Area with an uncommon name and an uncommon assignment to be of consequence. To be of consequence. What does it mean to be consequential? Anybody have a guess here? When I talk about being of consequence, living, leading a consequential life. What do I mean by that? Yes, sir. It's a little louder. It means what's carrying weight? Your decisions are carrying weight. That's right. It means your decisions are carrying weight. Anybody else? What does it mean for you? To live, to lead a consequential life. Yes, sir.
All right, from the statement of living a consequential life, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, from what I get from that, I basically means to me living a life contrary to the flow of what is normal or what is expected.
Yes, contrary to the flow of what is normal. Maybe what's expected. It's an intentional life. A life with questions and reflections. A consequential life. Radical imagination. What is that? Is it the status quo? Is it about protecting the status quo? Yes, no, maybe so. What is it? What's that? Thinking outside the box. What else? Radical imagination. Removing the box. Oh, wait a minute. So we heard here thinking outside the box. Another brother right here said removing the box. Oh, I think we're on to something. Radical imagination. If it's not radical, then what is it? It's just imagination. What makes it radical? Not seeing the challenges and just seeing the end goal, right? You got to be willing to shake things up. You got to be willing to shake things up, right? Part of how we shake things up are through the stories that we tell ourselves. Part of how we shake things up is the power of narrative. Power of narrative. When I just posed that question to you, who do you think you are? Anybody want to share? Yes, sir. Please stand up and nice and loud. Can we get him a mic? Young brother, what's your name and who do you think you are?
Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Jocks again, and I am a king. I am knowledgeable, I have integrity, I am nobility, and I am godly.
All right, all right, all right. Who else? Who do you think you are? Yes, yes, sir. Oh, right there, and he's gonna shuttle it over to you.
Yes, good evening. How's everybody?
Well, how are you?
Very well, man. All right, so I'm a black man that recognizes his divine nature and acts to make his existence a success unto himself and his race. So I'm a power brother. Everybody got that?
Can you just one more time?
Okay. I'm a power brother.
All right.
A black man that recognizes his divine nature and act to make his existence a success unto himself and his race. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay. We got power over in the room. Yes, sir. Your name and who do you think you are?
Good day, everyone. I'm Isaac Ferguson. I am a man that willing to make an impact on the world and lay a foundation for the new generation to come.
Laying a foundation for a new generation to come. Yes, sir.
I'm Anthony Bodie Jr., and I am the master of my faith and the captain of my soul.
All right now. Master of his faith and the captain of his soul. We can clap to that. I believe it. Think about the stories that we tell ourselves. You ever feel like you're not good enough? By show of hands, you ever feel that way? It's all right to be vulnerable, right? I feel that way sometimes. You feel like you're not good enough. Maybe you don't fit in. Maybe you're not fast enough. Maybe you're just not enough. But then what happens when we flip it? Remember that one scene from the movie Black Panther? When the Queen Mother, played by the illustrious Angela Bassett, what did she yell out to T'Challa in his moment of great challenge? It's all on the line. What did she yell out? Remember who you are. You ever forget who you are? You ever you just in it and you just, trying to make it to the other side of whatever it is? You ever forget who you are? Certainly if it can happen to T'Challa, the Black Panther himself, can't that happen to any of us? Yeah? You said that's why what? No, go ahead, because I couldn't hear you. Oh, no. I thought you were sharing something about T'Challa. All right. So the stories that we tell ourselves are incredibly important. And the stories that we tell the world are important. Look, I never planned to write a book. Didn't plan on doing it. I thought maybe I'll go on this trip and, I will turn around a news package, maybe a limited series podcast, and that's it, that's all. Then I was standing in my kitchen and I'm looking through some of my notes from the trip. And I had this nagging feeling that I wasn't able to shake. Feeling said, you got to write a book. And you hear something and you're like, let me talk myself out of this real quick. I don't have time to write a book. Again, the stories that we tell ourselves. I don't have time to write a book. The last book I wrote was a dissertation, and that was a whole lot. Am I going to get people to participate in interviews for this book? How am I going to do this? I have a friend, Michael Franklin, who's a speech writer. He runs an organization called Speechwriters of Color. Sometimes when you don't know, just pick up the phone and ask somebody who may know just a little bit more than you. Michael Franklin was that person for me. He knew a little bit more than me about the publishing world and all of that. and helped to set me on my way. And one thing led to the next. One interview led to the next. The VP had promised me an interview for a year. Just persistent. Hey, reaching out again, reaching out again, reaching out again, reaching out again. Finally, May 20th of this year, right before we published, you're on the calendar. West Wing interview. You have this amount of time, and if she really feeling it, you'll get more time. And now I stand here before you as the only book interview that VP Harris has done as vice president. It's not just about me, it's not just about the interview, it's about the content. We live in a time where misinformation and disinformation runs rampant, and where there are forces out there that want to tell us who you are, who we are, who our leaders are. And they have different motivations in doing that. My motivation was simple. I bared witness to a consequential series of events. 8,000 young people, look a lot like folks here in this room, showed up at Black Star Square to hear VP Harris talk about the future. A future that included their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations. It's the same Black Star Square that my father stood in as a 7-year-old when Ghana declared its independence. I can almost guarantee you that other members of the press corps didn't have that same appreciation for that moment. Nor did they have the same appreciation for telling that story in its fullness. One of the best compliments I've received thus far as an author came from a brother in DC. I was at an event, he pulls me aside, says, Dr. Quartey, I'm on chapter 3 of your book. Oh, really? Yeah. He said, your book is a Kamala Harris myth buster. He said, you know what, as much as they try to make it seem like she's not like us, she's actually more like us than I thought. I say this not influencing anybody's politics, but underscoring the weight of narrative and the possibilities that narrative change holds for all of us. When people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. Well, if there's nobody around to write it, to speak it, to share it, to amplify it, in this media environment, did it happen? And so I want to encourage each and every one of you to get real clear about who you are, who you want to be, who you're becoming. Make sure you create the space that allows you to be reflective, that allows you to re-examine some of the assumptions that you have about yourself, about your community, about the world. You know, that's one of the constants I have found, not just in interviewing Morehouse men, but befriending Morehouse men. Y'all are not afraid to challenge people's assumptions. And do so not as an intellectual exercise, but to do so in your service, in your deeds, the way you move through the world. Divine timing. Divine timing belongs to all of us, not just me. What sort of divine timing is afoot in your life right now? I mean, if you really think about it, how cool is it that everybody in this room could have been somewhere else? Everybody's calendar is jumping. You know, this is almost the end of the year. People are looking up and saying, wait a minute. I haven't got to this goal or that goal, and we're not even close to achieving this. But we made the time to be here. We made it a priority to be here. And I suspect, for many of the same reasons that I did, that I see myself in each of you. I'm the youngest of 5 boys, which, by the way, that's probably some of the best diplomatic training in life. A, being the youngest, and B, being the youngest of 5 boys. The youngest of 5 boys. I see my brothers in here. I am not my brother's keeper. What? I am my brother. I am not my sister's keeper. I am my sister. There's no daylight between us. And I hope that our time today has underscored exactly that. I also want to underscore that life is not linear. You're looking at a photograph right there of an 18-year-old Nii-Quartelai in Oakland, California, shaking the hand at a book signing of the great ancestor, Dr. Maya Angelou. People like Dr. Angelou, Dr. West, Baldwin, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Keith Boykin. These are authors, big thinkers that I've long admired. I mean, what good fortune to have one of them right here in the audience and on my bookshelf at the same time. Divine timing. Oprah Winfrey, this is me at 13 years old. How many of you are 13 in here? Any 13-year-olds, 13, 14, 15? Okay, over there, yeah. This was just the result of feeling called to serve. You're seeing this is a recurring theme in my life. You get the calling. The question is, what are you going to do with it? You never know who's on the other side of the call. You don't take the call because it's Oprah. Well, maybe you do. You take the call because of those values that we have all been raised with around service and leadership. Remember what I was saying earlier about what my dad drilled into me when I was a kid? It's not just about you, son. You represent something bigger than you, something deeper than just you. He used to say to me, your attitude will determine your altitude. I mean, like clockwork. I probably, if I got a dime for every time my dad said this, we'd all be able to fly to the Bahamas and back on a regular basis. Your attitude will determine your altitude. You will encounter many defeats and disappointments, but you must not be defeated. You must not be defeated. He was not defeated. She won't allow herself to be defeated. And these are my 4 brothers. No, that's not Dr. Cornell West in the lower hand corner. Uh, that's me. A very long time ago. But standing at the top is my brother James, who I lost to suicide in 2005. You never know what people are going through. And I miss him dearly. Losing him the way that I did, that our family did, I think has strengthened our empathy for not just one another, but everyday people in the world. It strengthened our compassion. Remember back to your attitude will determine your altitude? Every time I have a chance to pour into our brothers who may not be akin to being vulnerable, who may feel like they have the weight of the world on their shoulder and nowhere to lay it down, it's important to me to create a space that offers just a little bit of respite. A little bit of respite can go a long way. And in that little bit of respite, you might find a spark that might trigger your very own radical imagination. I want to thank you all for listening. And I want to invite you to ask any question you want. But before you do it, I want you to give yourselves a hand. Questions? Yes, sir.
Good day, Ethan Jocks again. Let me just find it. Okay, so.
I like the sound of those pages flipping.
So, currently, my dream is to become a world leader. And so far, my dream has been pushed aside by others. What is your inspiration to give to those who have lost their dream and lost their hope of a dream? And how do you think, give them an inspirational word on how they can get that dream back?
That's a great question, and thank you for sharing it. You know, the end of one dream can also be the beginning of the next. And, you know, sometimes we hold so tightly to one dimension of an idea at the risk of not embracing some of the other dimensions of it. Sometimes we bury our dreams away. You heard me talk earlier about returning to my first love of journalism. You know, I was doing fine and headed in a different direction, really a different side of the table if you think about it, and had forgotten that I had that dream. And sometimes if we put ourselves in a different environment, sometimes when we create a community of people who share our values and people who are rooting for our rise, you'd be amazed at the dreams that you have buried and how how well you uncover those dreams that were buried, right? And so your environment matters, your community matters, right? And creating an environment where you're sharing your values with one another, where you see yourself in one another, I think that's critically important to achieving your dreams, right? But persistence, you heard that in my story, right? The importance of persistence, not taking no for an answer. You know, if you feel called to do something, you've got to exhaust every possibility to make it so. And so, you know, I hope these little nuggets sustain you on your leadership journey, because as I look out in the crowd, I see a lot of incredible leaders in the making. And how you govern yourself and what you do today and tomorrow and the next day, little by little by little, you're writing an incredible story of your own. One and two.
Good day once again. I love the little comment you say your attitude determine your altitude. I love that. My question is, what is something you would tell a young man of the day to focus on?
Say it one more time.
My question is, what is something you would tell young men to focus on now in today's society?
What's one thing I would tell the young brothers here to focus on? Summoning courage. You know, I was a student at the University of Southern California when Dr. Maya Angelou came to visit. And, you know, she said this there, and she said this many times before, that she believed that courage was perhaps one of the most important virtues. She said, because without courage, you can practice the other virtues erratically, but not consistently. So you need to consistently have courage in order to practice all the virtues. And so my advice is find ways to summon that courage in yourself, to summon that courage in the brothers around you, right? You know how you do that? You create an environment where people feel safe to be their self in full bloom. In full bloom. And so suddenly, if brothers are supporting you and you're supporting other brothers, you're starting to create a community of folks that support each other in full bloom. We don't want anybody withering on the vine. We don't want any of your greatness withering on the vine, your brilliance withering on the vine. We don't want that. We want you to bring that to life, bring that to bear, bring that in community. And the only way you're going to do that is through taking courage. Acts of courage. Acts of courage are essential.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Azano Major. Dr. Quatey, I'd like to thank you for your presentation, for sharing some of your story. You asked us to give a round of applause for ourselves, but I'd like the opportunity for us to give a round of applause to you. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
One of the questions that stuck out to me during your presentation was, who are you uninterrupted? And I normally ask myself questions. I've asked myself, who do I want to become? And who am I becoming? But I've never asked myself, who am I uninterrupted? Could you elaborate on what that question means to you?
Sure. Thank you. Great question. And I was engaged in a really great conversation with a friend of mine a few nights ago. And, you know, what was going to be a quick little 5-10 minute conversation turned into an hour-and-a-half conversation. And one of the central questions was around, who are we uninterrupted? You know, there are a lot of demands on our lives. There are many competing priorities that we might have. And those priorities may be so loud that it's hard for us to hear what's happening inside of us. How many people in here meditate on a regular basis? All right. There are a number of people, not a lot of people, there's a number of people that meditate on a regular basis. How many people pray on a regular basis? Okay. Some people might say prayer is a form of meditation. All right. You know, how many people do walking meditations? Right? You may go out and take a walk on the beach or walk on a trail. You're in nature. Right? All of that counts. All of that counts. All of that also represents time uninterrupted, where you can plug into the source, where you can get clear about what's coming up for you. What are you carrying? What's some of that self-talk that's happening in your head? What stories are you telling yourself? And I have found that when you create time and space to listen to what's happening inside of you uninterrupted, these are some of the things you might learn. Because I guarantee you that the things that are playing in the back of your head, those messages that are playing in the back of your head are playing out in some way, shape, or form in terms of how you move through the world, how you govern yourself, your confidence, your belief in others, right? And so it's important for us to find somehow, some way to create the time and space for us to tap into ourselves and to shake loose those interruptions. This may not be hours and hours and hours. It could be 5 minutes. But it's critically important. You know, we need to be just as conscious about our health from the neck up as we are about our health from the neck down. Yes, seatmate.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. We've been chatting.
Yes.
And you mentioned that your goal was to, by the end of the year, was to interview the President of the United States. So my question is, obviously, right now, we don't know who that's going to be. And how will that impact your goal and your strategy in doing that?
Sure. Thank you for mentioning that. TMI. So I was referring to our only sitting president, President Biden, who is beginning to do sort of his farewell tour, his exit interviews, that sort of thing. And look, if you've interviewed a sitting vice president, why not interview a sitting president and make a habit out of that? And interview them not for the sake of interviewing them, but I think there are some really important questions about their work, his legacy, his moral leadership, and what some might call try to put this in a nice way, what some people might call, a lack of moral leadership on issues that matter. It's important when you're capturing a first draft of history to not just cherry pick the things that make you feel good or the things that you can relate to or the things that make you comfortable, right? But I know people will look back decades from now and they will read this book. And this book will say a whole lot more than what a lot of other publications have said. It was a high watermark that I had to hit in terms of writing this. re-examining our assumptions about Madam Vice President, about Africa and ourselves. And part of what you heard in the introduction is that's my style. I like to be in conversation with world leaders, with leaders of consequence, and I like to challenge their assumptions in addition to my own. And so that's the spirit by which I'm hoping to interview President Biden and make a habit out of interviewing other presidents and vice presidents in the history. Because when you look at the list of black historians, black presidential biographers, there aren't a lot of them. And so why not practice a little radical imagination and change that up, right? Be a first, but not an only, yes. Yes. Questions? The right there? Oh, yes.
All right. Early in your presentation, you mentioned how it's important for us as men to have a safe space to properly be vulnerable and to properly share how it is that we feel, right? Emotionality, basically. My question is mainly, what about those men who never really had that place to really share about how they feel, or to have a person or a group or community to properly parcel out their emotions? Because personally, I never grew up with that. So I just had to learn to do that for myself and by myself. So what advice would you give the young men in similar situations, in similar situations as myself, who are going through something but doesn't really have a person or a group to properly process how it is that they feel?
Let's give him a hand. I really appreciate that question. A lot of vulnerability in that question. And I hear that question, and I can't help but think about my brother James, and so many of our brothers who struggle to find the time, to find the space, to find the community to be able to share what's on their heart, what's on their mind. And I can't guarantee you that there's always going to be a group of people within arm's reach, right? But one of the tools that's been very helpful to me, and I think you've heard some of the other speakers talk about reading, and the power of books, the power of media to be able to transport us, to be able to inform us, to be able to connect us to resources that may not be in front of us. And so there will come a day, there will come a time where maybe your best friend or a sympathetic ear may not be near, right? But in this age of media with podcasts and books, I would encourage you to seek out the information, seek out the stories, seek out the stories of people overcoming challenges, and leaning into what is it about that story that may be similar to your story, right? And, I'm no different. I mentioned some of the authors. Just a moment ago, I mentioned some of the authors that have meant so much to me and have informed my worldview, have helped me to build my confidence, helped me to see myself, my community, my people differently, helped me to widen the lens, And sometimes we find that when our heart is aching, sometimes we find that just by hearing somebody else's story helps us to widen the lens a little bit, and then widen the lens a little bit more. And before you know it, maybe your heart doesn't ache as much, doesn't ache the same way, because you might be seeing yourself, your situation, and the world a little bit differently, right? Now, all that said, we all have to have a healthy media diet, because there's some media out there that ain't good for us. And so just how you read the label before you purchase anything at the grocery store, right? Just as you read the label on so many other things that you consume, you should consider the source when you are consuming media, because not all of it is good. Not all of it means us well. And if we're not careful, it will have us governing ourselves in ways that are not good for us and not good for our community. So I hope that answered your question. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon again. My name is Albury Onsimina Jr. I am from Nassau, Bahamas, a Morehouse College alumni. My question is, you showed a slide with VP Harris where you would have gone to Ghana. And my question is, how, from where you sit, how do we strengthen ties between Africa, the continent, and the African diaspora, which includes every one of us here in the Caribbean and other parts of the world? How do we strengthen those ties?
That's a great question. How do we strengthen those ties across the diaspora? I mean, that was really a part of what piqued my interest in this assignment in the first place. How many people have heard of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act? AGOA. So I want you to write that down. This is a part of your homework. This is the professor in me. It's part of your homework. I want you to look up AGOA. It has to be reauthorized, I think it's every 5 to 10 years. I think it's 5 years. The African Growth and Opportunity Act. That legislation passed originally, I believe, in the year 2000, and it's been used as a tool to advance human rights. Obviously, this is, American legislation, so it's through our lens. To advance human rights, to advance economic opportunity across the diaspora. Import-export businesses, for example, benefit from AGOA. Well, AGOA is going to be up for reauthorization in September 2025. So whoever controls Congress, whoever occupies the White House, will play an outsized role in perhaps revamping, reimagining that piece of legislation that has created a lot of jobs for folks on the continent and for small businesses here in the United States, right? And so legislatively, that's an opportunity there. But culturally, how many people here have Afro beats in your iTunes or on your Android? You listen to Afro beats? I listen to Afro beats. We know that the Recording Academy, for example, has a whole new category. You can win a Grammy for Afro beats, right? Why am I bringing this up? The cultural impact that we have on one another. Afro beats is not divorced from hip hop. It's not divorced from the legacies of jazz music, right? And so I think the opportunities for more intercultural exchange are enormous. The opportunities from a national security standpoint, we don't think of Africa in the same way we do other national security partners, but that's incredibly important. We know that, countries like China and Russia, among others, are advancing their national security interests there. So that's important. There was a New York Times article not too long ago that found that there's 300,000 tons of copper that was found in Zambia. What's so important about copper? Copper is a critical mineral. Anybody here got a cell phone? Air conditioning units, cell phones, EV batteries, right, require copper. Zambia just discovered 300,000 tons of it, and you better believe there are a lot of folks from Silicon Valley that want all of it. All of it. And so if we're not careful, if we're not paying attention, we're going to see the next wave of colonialism. So while everybody's enjoying their cell phones and listening to their Afro beats on their iPhones, right, it may set back a lot of our brothers and sisters back home on the continent. And so I could go on and on and on, but those are some examples of why engaging with one another across the diaspora is more important than ever. I want to thank all of you for listening to this presentation. I hope you found it valuable. And I can't wait to hear from Dr. Thomas and Dr. West and all the other speakers. Thanks, everybody. It's been wonderful being here in Bahamas.